After the destruction of the Second Temple, there had been a profound change of the guard. Whoever was officiating in the temple, whether it was before the Hashmonite priests for 120 years, later on Herodian priests, later on, the different chapters in the history of Judea in the first century of the Common Era, after that, after the destruction of the temple, everything had changed. There is no more temple and there is no more priestly service. A new group is emerging. Of course, it had all the roots, but a new group is emerging to the forefront. They are called Pharisees, which is derived from the word lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai, which means to interpret according, that's a biblical side. It is derived from the root lifrosh, which means to interpret. Okay, that they were new interpreters of the canonized law. The Bible was not canonized before the 2nd century of the Common Era as 24 books. It had been canonized in the age of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua after Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Those are the Pharisees, which later on had been called rabbis or Tanaim. They have various names, but the common denominator to all of that is one. They do not allow to write. They insist on oral teaching. They don't allow to create new books. They insist on new innovative interpretations of the highest profound kind. But we should say that in order to allow free interpretation, they had to canonize the Bible. So they would say, out of the various scriptures which might have been available, we chose the 24 books, 24 and no more. We know from the Talmud that there have been arguments if the book of Ezekiel should be in, if the book of Song of Songs should be in, if Esther should be in. The final 24 books of the canon were the closure of creative sacred writings or creative holy scriptures according to the rabbis. They did not allow any continuity of writing. Now, there were many books which were not chosen to be within the biblical canon, such as the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, the book of the 12 tribes, the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice, the temple scroll. All of them are sacred writings, with no exception. All of them are talking about heavenly issues, angelic issues, divine commandment, halachic things. However, they were excluded. Why would they be excluded? Because the rabbis, so to say, had decided that any book which is focusing on priests and angels and has any allusion to this 364 days calendar would be deemed as Sfarim Chitzonim, which means the books which are left outside, the external books. We call them in English pseudepigrapha or apocrypha, but in Hebrew it's more precise. It's the books which were left outside. They were left outside by Rabbi Akiva, who is telling us in the Sanhedrin, anyone who will read in the external books, those which were left outside, has no share in the world to come. That's a very strong act of censorship. However, those books which were left outside are the books that we had found in the Qumran library. Now, we know this dispute as the dispute between Pharisees and Sadducees. In Hebrew, Prushim v'Tzdokim. Sadducees are the priests from the house of Tzadok. That's all what it means, Sadducees. Later on, they had bad reputation because of their role in the New Testament, because of their fighting with the rabbis. But the priests from the house of Tzadok, who had written and who had officiated in the temple for 1,000 years before the Common Era, had their own memory, had their own visual perception, had their own conceptual world, and they fought for it. The rabbis said, any book with 364 days calendar, any book with priest angels, any book about Levi, about the sons of Levi, about the work of Levi, and so on, would be, of course, outside. There is no need for that for other generations. We chose those books that we believe that would be meaningful for later generation. We won't choose the temple scroll because it is not relevant, there is no more temple. We won't choose the priestly watches scroll, the scroll of priestly watches, because there are no more priestly watches, because there is no more temple. So we can explain why they left them outside, but it hasn't been noted enough that all what's important to the priest is utterly put aside in the rabbinical new literature. I'll give one example to make it understandable. The word covenant, brit, is one of the most frequent words in the scrolls of the Dead Sea. The covenant between God and his people, God and the priests, people of Israel and God. The word covenant is a major word. The word covenant in that meaning is completely erased from the Mishnah. There is no such word anymore. So as I said, what is central in the priestly literature is unseen or unwitnessed in the new rabbinical emerging literature. They had a new agenda. The priests were overlooked. When they describe the chain of transmission of the Torah, they don't mention this. They don't mention the priest at all. They deleted them. In the Bible it is said that the Torah has to be taught and transmitted by the priest. Very, very clearly it is said so. Moses says so to his tribal brothers, the Levites, that they should teach the statutes to the people of Jacob, to the people of Israel, the law to the people of Jacob, and so on. It is obvious that the priests in the Bible are entrusted with the biblical transmission of the law. According to the rabbis in the chapter of the fathers, there were never priests at all in the biblical transmission. So what they care, what one group care a great deal, the other group erased altogether. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for this talk. I find your distinction between the scrolls and the...
Between the what?
I find your differentiation between the scrolls and the easy convincing. But what I don't understand, are you suggesting then that the house of Sadok, or did you just suggest that Sadducees are then the authors of the scrolls? Is that, and do we have any independent textual knowledge of this house of Sadok?
Oh, well, what I suggest is only what is written in the scrolls. The scrolls mention time and again, the priests from the house of Tzadok and their allies. 1,000 times. I mean, it is mentioned time and again. The priests of the house of Tzadok and their allies. Now, I don't say, not at all, that only the Zadokite priest had written it. Of course not. Prophets were writing, poets were writing, people of different talents and inspiration and prophetic knowledge were certainly among the authors, as we know from the biblical library. However, what I say is that wherever there is any direct description of the people that should be addressed, the people who are defined as the priests of the house of Tzadok and their allies is always in the forefront. So when you look on the scroll of blessings, who should be blessed? First of all, the high priest from the house of Tzadok. Second, who should be blessed? The priest from the house of Tzadok and their allies. The third one is the president of Israel or something like that. So they are always in the forefront. They are the leadership. They signify biblical Israel ideal priestly leadership. As I said, I don't know if it ever have been such the case, but we do know from the Bible that the only high priests that were serving were from the high priest of the house of Tzadok. That is a well-known stuff. When Ezekiel is talking in the last chapters of his book, 40-48, on the future temple, he's talking on the high priest from the house of Tzadok, those which are close to God and chosen by him. No other group is described in these words. So the people who had written the scrolls were very much interested in the priestly lore, in the priestly legends, in the priestly myths, in the temple worship. That was their backbone. That was their focus. That was their most intrinsic interest. And we should respect it. We shouldn't say the priestly nature of the scrolls doesn't matter. It matters because it is everywhere there. We shouldn't say that this is secondary. It's not secondary, it's primary. We can find evidence on holy time via calendar, on holy time and ritual via priestly watches, on holy ritual via temple sacrifices and stuff. in every page that you would open. So it is, for them, the only common denominator that you can say about the scrolls that have been found along the shores of the Dead Sea is that they were kept and authored and reserved and transmitted by people who believed in the ideal biblical Israel and in the complete responsibility of people who associate themselves with this conservative past, with the priestly house of Tzadok, to continue to believe and to work on those ideas which have been completely pushed away to oblivion. In the day that the United Nations had declared on the State of Israel in 1947, these scrolls were found in the very same day, as like a long shalom, a long greetings from ancient past. In the very same day where the United Nations had declared about the acknowledgement of a new state as the State of Israel, these scrolls were first introduced. So they were in oblivion for 2,000 years and more. They were unknown. They were certainly not the central part of Jewish memory. But I would like to respect the other memories, the alternative memory, the shreds of memory that were entered to oblivion, and yet we have recovered them by a miracle, by a chance. It's wonderful that they have been recovered. We should pay attention to the other memories, to the other mythologies, to the other point of interest and focus of devotion which had informed the Jewish people of the 2 centuries before the Common Era and of the few decades of the first era. I believe that we should take a lesson from there. There was never one authoritative Jewish community. There was always splinters, there was always disputes, there was always disagreement. However, if you would ask, what is the one single thing that the Jews shared always? It was their capacity to read and write. They may use it for belligerent writing, they may use it for all kinds of fights, but they would always say, we have sacred writings, we have holy scriptures, we can read and we can recreate and we can comment and we can do exegesis and we can do law, but we can also do myths and mysticism. We are free people to write, although we were told by Rabbi Akiva that we should not read the external books. We had read them some way or another during the centuries. Many of them we were not familiar with. Now we are lucky to live in a century that they are easily available to anyone who is interested in ancient history and in the way that one can cross the waves and turmoils of historical destiny. We'll conclude here. Thank you very much. Good evening. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here with you, and I would like to start by thanking Ari Katz and Avi Margalit and all the distinguished members of the organization that had facilitated this series of lectures. Thank you, all of you, for supporting and taking interest in. This is the one topic that everybody knows something about, because anyone who has any affiliation with Jewish life knows something about the Jewish calendar. But I would like to challenge this idea and to ask you a very simple question. When does a Jewish year start? But before I would ask that, I would like to say one previous sentence. The great Jewish British philosopher, Sir Isaiah Berlin, was asked, what is the uniqueness of the Jewish people? Or what is the problem of the Jewish people? He said, in a very short sentence, they have far too much history and they have far too little geography. I think that's rather insightful observation, because the fact that we don't have enough geography is well proven every day. But the fact that we have too much history is really meaningful and unique. What does it mean? That anything that we're going to say had been challenged through 3 millennia. The Jewish people were around for 3 millennia. It means that whatever was considered proper by one group of Jews in a certain time was challenged and deconstructed by other groups of Jews in other times. We need to learn to live with differences, with many voices, with challenges, with disputes. That's the way it always was. It's not only Jews of today who are disagreeable, who are controversial, who are partial and impartial and so on. That was the situation always. And that's a blessed thing, because only literate people can spend time with arguments, with challenging, with criticism, with change. All those things are vital part of Jewish history, because people who are literate, and the Jewish people were always literate, people who are literate take the freedom to ask, to criticize, to challenge, to reform, to think, and to recreate. That being said, let us start by asking, as I said, when does a Jewish year start? Yes? Yeah, that's very good. The first of Nisan. So why all the respectable Jews who are sitting here are celebrating Rosh Hashanah? Now why? This is a serious question. This is no fun. Why all of us are well familiar with Rosh Hashanah in 1st of Tishrei and nobody is celebrating 1st of Nisan? The Torah asserts explicitly, this month, the month of the spring, is the head of the month, or is the first of the month. It is well described in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, that the year should start in the 1st of Nisan, the month of the spring. Why Jews today are celebrating the beginning of the year in the 1st of the 7th month? How come? Since when? Why? Who had made the change? Before I would offer the answer, I would like to remind you that the first thing that the French Revolution had done was to change the calendar. They had been living, as everybody else in Europe, according to the calendar, the Julian calendar and the Georgian calendar, for many, many years. But the first thing they had done, they had, in the eve of the revolution, they had shot the clocks on the churches, and they said that signifies the end of the old time and the beginning of a new time. What was the first thing the Russian Revolution activists had done? They had changed the calendar. They said this is the end of the old age and the beginning of the new age. Something of that sort had happened with us. Something of a revolution had taken place in Jewish history, where a group of people had decided that it's about time to end the old time and to start a new time. But when you change a calendar, it's much more than a calendar. It's perception, it is history, it is set of priorities, it's principles, it's cultural context, it's a whole lot. It's much more than a principle of calculation. And I would like to elaborate a little bit on how this process had taken place. I would start by asking you where the holiday Rosh Hashanah is first mentioned. Where is it mentioned? Where? It is not mentioned in the Bible. It is not mentioned in the Bible. There is no such holiday. The Bible knows a holiday known as Day of Memorial, or Day of the Trumpets, Yom Zikaron Truah, the day of memorial where trumpets are being blown. But what does it signify? Where is this day of memorial? Is it the only day of memorial? Now things are complicated, because this day of memorial is nowhere to be attached to the beginning of the year. This is an innovation. But before we would discuss the innovation, let us take a look on what is a Jewish calendar in the first millennium. The Jewish calendar that we know today is 2,000 years old, but before the last 2,000 years, we had a complicated calendar, which was the temple calendar for 1,000 years. How do we know that? In 1947, the treasure of the Dead Sea Scrolls was found by accident. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have 930 holy scriptures. All the Dead Sea Scrolls are holy scriptures. They contain parallels of the biblical library with differences. The major difference between the biblical tradition as we know it and the biblical tradition as has been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls is the issue of the calendar. I'll say it one more time. The Dead Sea Scrolls has all the biblical books with the exception of the book of Esther. Some of the books are perfect, some of the books are torn, some of the books are only shreds, but it has a representation of all the biblical library. When we make a comparison between the Dead Sea Scroll biblical library and the traditional Bible as we know it, the most noticeable difference between the biblical traditional books and the biblical books as they have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls is the issue of the calendar. What is the calendar in the Dead Sea Scrolls? In various representations in many books. It has the following idea. Time is holy, time is eternal, time is pre-calculated, and time is based on a solar calendar. I'll explain each one of those things. Time is eternal. It means that it's not for humans to dictate time. Time is eternal, and it had been brought from heaven to earth by Enoch, son of Jared, the seventh of the patriarchs of the world in the first 10 generations, number 7. On Enoch it had been said that he was walking with God, unlike the other people who are mentioned in Genesis chapter 5, on whom all had been said that they were born to a certain father, they gave birth to certain children, and they were taken to heaven. They were accomplished their life and died. On Enoch it had been said that he was taken to heaven. On the question why, it's only Enoch who was taken to heaven. The first book of Enoch, the second book of Enoch, and the third book of Enoch are telling us that he was taken to heaven in order to study the calendar. What did he study? What did he learn? From whom did he learn? That's a topic for a whole lecture. I would just sum up in a very short way. Enoch learned that the calendar has 364 days, which are divided equally to 4 quarters of 91 days. Each one of those 91 days has 13 Sabbaths in it, and altogether, since we have 4 quarters of 91 days each, we have 52 Sabbaths every year. This is a pre-calculated calendar, referring to the solar calendar of 365 days. But it is not 365, it's 364. Why? Moses had told us that the Jews are, as you know, am kshe oref, are troublesome. They couldn't be like everybody else talking about 365 days calendar. They had to have 364. Why is that? Because they needed a calendar that is divided by 7, a calendar of Shabbatot, a calendar of Sabbath, that would reflect the unique Jewish unit of time, which is the unit of 7 days. It is of the highest importance to understand it, because Jewish time is consisted of 2 different systems, the audible time and the visible time. Audible time refers to number 7. Anything which has to do with 7 is audible time. Every 7 days is a Sabbath. Every first 7 months of the year, a year starts in Pesach, in the months of Pesach, every first 7 months of the year, there are 7 holidays. All the biblical holidays are all in the first 7 months of the year, between the months of the spring to the months of the autumn, from the first to the 7 months. All the holidays together with the 52 Saturdays are consisting of 70 days. Every 7th year there is a sabbatical, and every 7/7 of year there is a jubilee. The common denominator to all those sevenfold calculation is that none of them is visible. All those distinctions are audible, and they are the content of the covenant. This is explicitly said in the book of Jubilees and in the book of Enoch, and it is well asserted in the Bible, of course, but usually we don't consider that in this system, that sevenfold time is the time of the covenant. And what is the content of this seven-time division? It is that every 7 days, every 7 holidays, every 7 months, every 7th year and every 7/7 of year, we have to resign our sovereignty, we have to stop working, we have to decline all human right to change nature, because that's the meaning of Shabbat, Shemitah, and Jubilee. Shemitah is a fallow year, Shemitah is the sabbatical year. The meaning of those time divisions is that human beings are giving up their right to work, to change, to make money, to affect nature. They are striking from work. They are Shabbating, if you wish to make it a verb. They are not doing anything. They are doing only one thing. They are convening together to study the law. Because in the 7 festivals of the Lord, and in every Sabbath, and in the Jubilee year and the sabbatical year, the idea is that you are not working, but you are taking the free time in order to study. We may want to reflect on the following fact. In antiquity, there were many nations which were far stronger and far bigger than the Jewish people. Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, not Egypt of today, but hieroglyphic Egyptians, all those were mighty people, highly cultured people. No one today is speaking Assyrian. Nobody is cursing in Babylonian. Nobody is writing poetry in hieroglyphic Egyptian. Nobody is speaking Prezite, Jebusite, all those languages of the 7 people of Canaan. The only people from antiquity in this part of the world that are speaking the language of their fathers are the Jewish people, who are capable to read Hebrew, to speak Hebrew, to talk in Hebrew. Why is that? Because of this system of the audible cycles of time, when you don't work and you convene together to hear the law, when you teach your children to read, when you teach the whole community to listen to the divine word. In order to have those free time cycles, for that we need the sevenfold cycle of the audible divisions of time. Now, on the same time, we have another division of time. It is called the visible circle of time. If the first division, the sevenfold division, is the division of the covenant, which is directed only towards the Jewish people who are members of the covenant, who are accepting the covenant, the other kind of time, the visible time, is equally shared with all other humans on the world. The visible time is not Jewish time, it is universal time. Visible time is all divisions of time that we can see with our eyes. Sunrise and sunset, the moon and the spring and the autumn and winter and summer, all divisions that we can distinct through our sight. That kind of time is called the chariots of heaven, Merkavot HaShamayim. The first division of time, the sevenfold cycles, is called Mo'adei Dror, times of liberty. Times of liberty are only given to the Jewish people. The chariot of heaven, which are the eternal cycles of changing of the seasons, are given to all human beings. The difference is that the Jewish people were in charge on keeping those 2 cycles of time, the visible time and the audible time, and to synchronize between them. Those synchronization cycles were kept by the priests from the house of Tzadok, those who were serving in the temple for 1,000 years. Now, how come that all those perceptions of time division were lost in oblivion. Why we don't know much about it? Why we needed the Dead Sea Scrolls to find out about it? Because this time perception was marginalized, was thrown into oblivion by the revolution that was taking place in the beginning of the first millennium. But it was more complicated than that, because if for 1,000 years the priests were keeping the time cycles through the holy watches, which are detailed in 1 Chronicles chapter 24, if they were keeping those time cycles as it is attested among the Dead Sea Scrolls, why it had stopped? What happened? Now, how it had stopped, you know without knowing it, because everybody sitting here had heard about the holiday of Hanukkah. But most of us don't know that Hanukkah is a very complicated holiday. It's not really a holiday for the priests. It's not a holiday acknowledged by the Ethiopian Jews. It's not a holiday known or acknowledged by the Samaritans or by various other Jewish cycles in antiquity. This is a questionable holiday because what it signifies is the end of the biblical world and the beginning of a new order. How did it happen? In the year 175 before the Common Era, Antiochus, the Seleucian king, had conquered Jerusalem. Seleucian kings means from the house of the Seleucus, the heirs of Alexander the Great, Alexander Mokdon, and he was from Greek origin. He had Greek education. All Greek people had been living for years according to a lunar calendar starting in the autumn, in the months of Dios, while all the Jewish people were living for years according to a solar calendar starting in the spring, in the months, on a solar calendar starting on the spring, which includes 364 days. When Antiochus Epiphanes, which means the one who had the divine revelation, when Antiochus Epiphanes had conquered Jerusalem in 175 before the Common Era, he demanded to celebrate his birthday according to his own calendar. He said, if I'm a king, I would like to have my birthday celebrated every month, not once a year. If I'm a king, you know, why do we like our birthday being celebrated? What do we get in birthday? Presents. Why should we get presents only once a year? We may as well get it every month if we are the king. Now, his idea was, if I'm the king, I may as well have things according to my own desire. My own desire was to have a birthday every month in the day of my birthday, which was the 25th of the months of Dios, but he said every month in the 25th of the month I would like to have a celebration. That's very good, only in Jerusalem time was calculated according to a solar calendar, not according to a lunar calendar. What is the difference between a solar and a lunar calendar? Solar calendar is a pre-calculated calendar that has nothing to do with the moon, while lunar calendar is a calendar which is based on observation and not on pre-calculation. In a solar calendar, which has 364 days, you can say in advance that there are 12 months, each one of the months of the year has 30 days. Each one of the months of the year has a date and a day that it starts. Always, always, the first month, that's the month of Nisan, the first month would start on Wednesday, the second month would start on Friday, the third month would start on Wednesday, and one more time. The fourth month would start on Wednesday, the fifth month would start on Friday, the sixth month would start on Sunday. It had been brought, as I said, according to the priestly law, it had been brought from heaven by Enoch, son of Jared, was transmitted to his son Methuselah. His son Methuselah transmitted it to his son Lamech, so we're told in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Lamech had passed it to the brother of Noah, his name was Ner, and Ner had passed it to Melchizedek, the one who meets many generations afterwards, Abraham, and teach him the calendar. That's the priestly alternative memory to the biblical memory that we know. But the major thing is about the calendar. The calendar is the basis of all Jewish memory. The calendar is the basis of the temple worship. The calendar is the foundation of the covenant. But as I said, when Antiochus came to Jerusalem in 175 before the Common Era, he said, I am the king and I will implement my own calendar, the Greek lunar calendar, which starts in the first moon of the autumn. It has nothing to do with pre-calculation. It has nothing to do with solar calendars. This is a different calendar. The high priest who was serving at that time, at that period, his name was Onias, son of Shimon, Chonio ben Shimon, had refused the king. He told him, in Jerusalem, in the temple, there is only one holy calendar. It is kept by the priest from days of old, from the time that we have temple in Jerusalem, from the 10th century before the Common Era. We cannot change the calendar. We would do everything you want. We would bring you presents, we would do a celebration outside of the temple, but we cannot change the temple calendar. Well, the king was not tolerant, nor was he democratic. He said, behead him or, kick him out of office. Onias had to run for his life. He was murdered later, but he had to run from his life. The king had nominated his brother, Jason, who had agreed to make some kind of a compromise. It didn't work because you cannot synchronize between the solar calendar, which is pre-calculated, and the lunar calendar, which is working on observation. And it didn't work, and Jason was murdered too, and it was hard time, and was exchanged by a non-priest called Menelaus, and he was exchanged by another person. His name was Alkimos, and that's the time when the Hashmonean War starts. The Hashmonean War was against the Jews who were officiating in the temple, not against the king. It was against the Mityavnim, the Hellenized Jews who had accepted Antiochus' ideas about time, which was contesting the Jewish tradition of time. There was a war between 167 to 164 before the Common Era, and the war ended because Antiochus died in Persia, far away from the war zone, and they had hoped that a new regime would start without imposition of the calendar. But that was not the case. There was a decade of chaos, and different people and different parties were trying to conquer the temple. At the end of this chaotic decade, Jonathan, the son of Matityahu, was nominated to a priest, to a high priest. It was not his position, because the high priesthood was always kept to the people of the family of Yedaiah, which are direct descendants of Aaron. The Hashmoneans were not belonging to this family. Jonathan was nominated by the Greek king Alexander Balas. His brother, Simon, was nominated by the Greek king Demetrius. The Greek kings had demanded that the lunar calendar would be imposed. So the famous Hashmoneans, which are usually delineated as heroes and as liberators, were no heroes and no liberators. In fact, they were traitors from the point of view of the priest. They called them sons of darkness because they accepted the lunar calendar. They didn't have a choice. If the king said, if you want to officiate in the temple, you have to accept the lunar calendar. Those who resented this compromise were called the priests from the house of Tzadok, or the Zadokite later. They were calling themselves sons of light. The difference between light and darkness was the difference between solar calendar and lunar calendar. If you accepted the solar calendar, these 364 days, you were sons of light. If you accepted the lunar calendar, the one that had no fixed number of days, you were sons of darkness. The war between sons of light and sons of darkness, was the internal Jewish war between people who had kept to the ancient order of the temple, holy time, and people who made compromise with the new political situation where the Greek kings had imposed their will on Jerusalem and on the land through the Hashmoneans who were officiating as priests. The old priesthood, the Zadokite priesthood, had resented it profoundly. They hated the new unofficiated priest, and the new priesthood, the Hashmoneans, had hated the old priesthood, the Zadokite priest. It was an internal Jewish fight, a very profound fight. At the end of it, the Romans came and had made a new decision. For 120 years, the Hashmonean kings were ruling in a very horrible way. They were assassinating each other, they were assassinating mothers and brothers, they were imposing Greek culture in various ways, and they were much resented by the members of the old regimes who defined themselves HaKohanim Bnei Tzadok ve'Anshei Britam, the priests from the house of Tzadok and the members of their covenant. For 120 years, they were fighting not with swords, with literature. Much of the literature that had been found among the 930 scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls is the literature written by the priests from the house of Tzadok against the priests from the house of Hashmonai. But in the year 67 before the Common Era, the Romans were conquering Jerusalem according to the invitation of one of the kings of the Hashmoneans who was fighting with his brothers. Antigonus and Aristobulus were fighting with each other. One of them had summoned the Roman soldiers who were in Syria. Rome had conquered the land of Israel in the year 67 before the Common Era. The Romans had their own idea about how time should be calculated, because every new regime has its own ideas what time should be like, what calendar should be like. You're all familiar with the result of the Roman conquest, because you're all familiar with the Julian calendar. That's the basic calendar, the civil calendar that we're living according to. But very few of us are familiar with the fact that this Julian calendar was calculated in the year 45 before the Common Era as a result of the Roman conquest of the land of Israel and Syria and Egypt. They said we can't work with those lunar calendars because you cannot pre-calculate anything. We don't know in which day the moon would rise and at what day should we collect taxes and pay salaries. We need a workable system which could be pre-calculated. Julius Caesar, then he was not Caesar, he was only a king, Julius was convening in Alexandria scholars of all denominations and all religions. They set number of years and they devised the 365 and a quarter calendar. You know, that's the reason that every February we have, every 4th February we have an extra day. That's the quarter, because you cannot have a quarter of a day in the calendar, so every 4th year you have to have 29 days in February. Anyhow, the new solar calendar of the Roman Empire is the 3rd calendar that we're talking about. The first one is the ancient biblical priestly calendar of 364 days. The second one is the Antiochian Greek lunar calendar with no fixed number of days based on lunar observation. The third one that I just now presented very quickly is the Julian calendar from the year 45 before the Common Era. But that is happening within the land of Israel. The Romans had conquered the land of Israel, as I said, from the year 67 before the Common Era. That's a very hard century. At the end of this century, half of the 1st century before the Common Era and half of the 1st century of the Common Era, it's a very hard time. This is the time that the new party, known as the Pharisees, is coming forward. As a result of the conflict between the ancient priesthood, the Zadokite, and the new unofficial priesthood of the Hashmoneans and the Roman conquest, all of that together had paved the ground to the rise of the Pharisees, Prushim. Now, what is Pharisees? What is Prushim? Prushim is derived from the word lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai, to interpret for them according to the words of the Lord. to interpret. Prushim means interpreters. And there is a great difference between Prushim and Kohanim. Kohanim, priests, are writing and arguing that everything sacred and everything holy has to be written. The Pharisees, Prushim, are arguing exactly the opposite. They say that the most important thing is the new oral law, the new interpretation, the new oral deliberation. This is a complete innovation, because until the first century, before the Common Era, there was no such a thing as oral law. The Pharisees had introduced the word tradition, masoret, which is not a biblical word, and the oral law, Torah shebe'al peh, as against the old priestly order that by that time was a very evil priestly order. It was the Hashmonean priestly order and the Herodian priestly order, because the Romans were nominating Herod, and he had invited unofficial priests to serve in the temple. On this background of great political chaos, the new party, known as the Pharisees, later on as the rabbis, would come forward and introduce the idea of oral law, the idea of a new perception of holiness, the new idea of tradition, and the most important thing, the new calendar. But that had happened only after the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era. It was a tragedy in every possible aspect. Jerusalem was ruined, the temple was ruined, but the outcome of this complete catastrophe was a new order. The priest of any kind could not offer any response to the new order, because if there is no temple, there is no priesthood. There is no place to calculate the old priestly calendar, there is no place to do the sacrifices, there is no place to keep the ancient scrolls, there is no more temple. The only group that could step forward and offer a solution to the catastrophe was the party known as the Pharisees, Prushim or rabbis or Tanaim, it's all the same. The meaning of this new party is, let us introduce entirely new order. What did they do? They closed the Bible. They said that there is no more prophecy. You cannot write anymore. They said instead of writing, you should start to interpret. You should start to deliberate oral laws. And there is a profound difference between written law and oral law. In the written law, you don't discuss the identity of the authors. You discuss the Holy Scriptures. In the oral law, you don't have any text. You have only teachers. Thus, every sentence in the oral law would be starting by Rabbi Akiva said, Rabbi Shimon said, Rabbi Ishmael said, because the teachers are those who saying different traditions. In the old priestly law, there is never a name mentioned by who is the writer of the teaching, because it is considered to be divine law that humans are recording, and there is no importance to the identity of the recorder. There is a great importance to the sanctity of the scriptures. So, the ancient priestly tradition, with the solar calendar of 364 days, had ascribed utmost importance to written tradition, including the written calendar. The new group, the Pharisees, the rabbis, had ascribed the highest importance to oral deliberation, to interpretation of the legal scriptures, and they said that they have to be sealed. There is no such idea in the biblical collection itself. There is no reason why the Bible should be sealed. Why what had been written for a millennium should stop to be written? What is the last biblical work in our collection of the Bible? It's the book of Daniel. It was written in the year 165 before the Common Era, before the results of the war with Antiochus. 165 before the Common Era is the last biblical book. He is telling us in a literary way about the conquest of Antiochus. He's talking about a king who came forward and had desired to change laws, order, and calendar. That's Daniel chapter 7. However, from the time of Daniel, 2nd century before the Common Era, to the time of the sages, early 2nd century of the Common Era, 3 calendars had changed. The ancient priestly calendar was dismissed. The new Antiochian Greek calendar was introduced for 120 years in the time of the Hashmoneans. 3rd calendar was the Roman calendar of 365 and a quarter days, introduced in the year 45 before the Common Era. And after the destruction, the sages said the following: we don't want to live according to the Roman calendar. We want to keep our own identity. We cannot live according to the priestly calendar because there is no more temple, there is no more service, there is no more sacrificial service. There is no more point to keep the ancient priestly calendar when only priests can calculate divisions of time. We need a new calendar. So then they devised a new calendar, which had a unique principle among all the calendars in the world. The principle is, we will never tell you anything. We will never tell you how many days are in a year. We will never tell you how many days are in a month. We would never tell you what's the principle of calculation. We would keep it all secrets, and we would nominate Beit Din, we would nominate a court of law that would decide and decree it according to our own decision, not according to any pre-calculation, not according to any preset principles. We would decide when the months would start and when the months would end. We would decide. Now, when did they decide it? When is it first mentioned? In Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah as a holiday is first introduced in Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Mishnah is the literature of the sages. It was written down much later, but it was orally kept and orally recited from the early 2nd century of the Common Era. What do they say in Mishnah Rosh Hashanah? They tell us in a very complicated way that in fact there are 4 Rashei Shana. There is not only one Rosh Hashanah, there are 4 Rashei Shana, heads of the years. And they start to tell you all kinds of legend. There is this kind of Rosh Hashanah, there is that kind of Rosh Hashanah. But I ask you a simple question. When you are paid taxes, do you choose to pay according to your Rosh Hashanah, or the government is telling you, well, you would pay taxes with all due respect according to the calendar of the country where you live? That exactly was the system with the Romans, with the Greeks, with the Egyptians, with the Persians. The government is dictating the calendar, always and everywhere. Now, every individual group may choose to have its own calendar as an addition, but you pay taxes according to the ruling government and not according to your own religious identity. Now, if you would ask today, where do you think the people who set the calendar in the state of Israel are sitting? In which office would you suggest? Which one? No, but in which government, in which office of the government, the people who decide the calendar are sitting? No, not in the treasury, not in the office of religion, not in the education. No, they are sitting where they are expected to sit. In Misrad Rosh HaMemshala, in the office of the Prime Minister. Although, you know, you may say the calendar today is a combination between the Greenwich time and the world Julian calendar and so on, nevertheless, the calendar is dictated in the office of the Prime Minister. With all due respect, I don't know where the American calendar is being dictated or written, but it's presumably in something of that sort, in the President office or something like that. But the point of the matter is that the new ruling group was the sages after the destruction of the temple. And they wanted to clarify in a very clear-cut way that time is no more a subject of priestly calculation, that time is no more part of the sacrificial hegemony order. Time is in human hands, and this is very clearly declared in the story of Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, in a story that many of you have heard or read about, the story where Rabban Gamliel is ordering Rabbi Yoshua to come to him in Yom Kippurim that is falling according to his, Rabbi Yoshua, calendar. How could that have happened? What was the story like? It goes like that. Rabban Gamliel, who is the representative of the new order, the order of the sages, is declaring the beginning of the new month, the 7th month. This is most important month because that's the month of Memorial Day and the month of Day of Atonement and the month of Sukkot. You need to calculate it very carefully. For 1,000 years, the 7th month always started on Wednesday. So the first of the 7 months, Memorial Day, would always be on Wednesday. Thus, Yom Kippurim, Day of Atonement, inevitably would always be on Friday. That's why it's called Shabbat Shabbaton. Always would be on Friday. Sukkot, which is in the middle of the month, would always be on Wednesday. Rabbi Yoshua, who was a Levi, wanted to help Rabban Gamliel to declare the month starting on Wednesday. But Rabban Gamliel had received a testimony on the new moon, which had caused him to err in his calculation. Rabbi Yoshua is trying to convince him that he should change his ruling. But Rabban Gamliel says to him, I don't want to hear what you have to say. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. I am the order now, and I would dictate when the month would start, even if I'm wrong. I would dictate it. Rabbi Yoshua is crying bitterly because he understands that that's the end of the priestly order. Rabban Gamliel is telling him, not only you would accept what I say, you would come to me in Yom Kippurim according to your own calendar, in the Day of Atonement according to your own calendar. You would come to me with your money and with your purse, with your cane, and you would do everything that you may not do in Yom Kippurim in order to show that it is not Yom Kippurim according to the old calendar, but it is Yom Kippurim according to the calendar that I dictate. Rabbi Yoshua is crying bitterly because he realized the consequences of that decision. This is the end of the old order. He's crying, and the student, Rabbi Akiva, is telling him a very important insight. He's telling him the following: let me offer you an interpretation on the key verse of the calendar. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, it is said, and I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate it, Ele mo'adei Adonai mikra'ei kodesh asher tikre'u otam b'mo'adam. Those are the holy days of the Lord, holy festivals in their appointed time that you should call according to their appointed time. Those are the holy days of the Lord. Now Rabbi Akiva said, instead of saying, those are the holy time of the Lord, that you should call in their appointed time, he said, you, even if you are mistaken, you, even if you are erring, you, even if you are deliberately mistaken, you would decree the time and not anybody else. Now what does he do? For that we need a tiny bit of Hebrew. In Hebrew the verse is said, Ele mo'adei Adonai asher tikre'u otam b'mo'adam. Otam means they, the holidays, should be called in their appointed time. Rabbi Akiva reads it as atem. Ele mo'adei Adonai asher tikre'u atem. Atem afilu shogegim, atem afilu mezidim, atem afilu to'im, atem. Those are the holy time of the Lord that you should call. You should call them even if you err. You should call them even if you're deliberately making a mistake. You should call them even if you're just mistaking without intending. You. So this interpretation, which is offered in Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, in Bavli Rosh Hashanah, and in other versions, is the moment when the calendar has changed. This is the moment when the Jewish people had decided to invent a new order, when you start in the 7th month and not in the 1st month, when you cut the time according to the lunar calendar of observation and not according to the solar calendar of calculation, when humans, everyone, can give testimony, and the court would rule according to a testimony about the time of the moon. Nothing in the Bible tells us that the moon should be taken into calculation. And in fact, in the ancient versions of Genesis that were found among the scrolls, it is said in the story of the creation of the luminaries, where in our tradition it is mentioned that the sun and the moon should be taken into consideration for declaring time. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, it is said that only the sun should be taken into consideration because it is a solar calendar. However, what do you need in time of a lunar calendar? Lunar calendar, basically, it's about 354 days. You miss quite a few days for a full solar year of 365 and a quarter. What do you need to do? You need to add an extra month, Shana Me'uberet, to add an extra month. Is there any reference in the Bible for an extra month? Of course not. There was no extra month in the biblical order, because the biblical order was a solar calendar order of 364 days. But the sages who had edited the Bible had erased every place where it was said explicitly that the year has 364 days. Now, they did not want to intervene in the biblical tradition. That was Holy Scriptures. But the only topic that they took the freedom to intervene in the text is the matter of the calendar, where in our traditional story of Noah, the story of the flood, if you'll read it carefully, you'll see that it is a story of a calendar. It is mentioned when Noah started the voyage, when he ended the voyage. It is a whole year. In the parallel tradition, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it is said, and Noah had stayed in the ark a full year, 364 days. It is said explicitly, but in the traditional version, no such number is mentioned. The word 364 days is not mentioned in the Bible, but it is mentioned in the book of Enoch and in the book of Jubilees and in Genesis, in the scrolls, the story of the Bible, and in various other sources among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So people may argue, people may say, it's not the sages who omitted it, it's the priest who had added it. We may say that. However, we must say that the priestly literature is earlier than the rabbinical literature in 1,000 years, because all the biblical tradition was written in the course of the first millennium before the Common Era, while all rabbinical tradition was written in the course of the first millennium of the Common Era. The priestly literature is much more ancient, really in 1,000 years. So, in the biblical traditions which were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a year of 364 days is mentioned time and again in various sources, time and again. In the letter known as Miktzat Maaseh Torah, which means a little bit of the Torah writing, the first chapter is how to calculate a calendar. And they say, the first month starts on Wednesday. The first holiday, Pesach, is on Tuesday in the 14th of the first month. Chag HaMatzot is in the 15th of the first month. Next holiday, it is Shavuot in the 15th of the third month. Next holiday, Memorial Day, is in the 1st of the 7th month. Next holiday is Day of Atonement in Friday in the 7th month, and last holiday is Sukkot in Wednesday in the 7th month. Now, it's most important for them to say that every holiday has a day and a date, while in our biblical tradition, no day and no date is given to many of the holidays. We know, of course, on the Memorial Day, which is what the book of Leviticus is telling us in this chapter 23. But we don't know that there are 4 memorial days, which correspond to the first of the first, the first of the fourth, the first of the seventh, and the first of the 10th. Each one of them is a Wednesday. Each one of them is referring to the following. The first of the first is the vernal equinox. The first of the seventh is the autumnal equinox. The first of the fourth is the longest day of the year, and the first of the 10th is the shortest day of the year. That was the foundation of the calendar for 1,000 years, where every day had a date, where every holiday had a date, where the priests were calculating it with great care and importance. But all that mathematical, mechanical work was intended for one single thing. Holiness is about eternity. Eternity is about time, cycles of time. Counting cycles of time was most holy because that what promised cycles of liberty and education. Mo'adei Kodesh means holy times, holy convocations, holy festivals. But Mikra'ei Kodesh means times of reading, times of convening to read together. Mikra means reading. Likro means to read. In those holy convocations, every 7th day, every 7 holidays, every jubilee year and every sabbatical year, the idea was that work should be cut and reading should be celebrated. Enslavement to work should be stopped and celebrating of reading should be inaugurated. The idea that holiness is about not working, because in Hebrew, as you know, avodah and avdut, work and enslavement, comes from the same root. We were always called to remember that work is a curse and work is enslavement when it is enforced upon you. It is a blessing when you choose it. It is a curse when it is enforced on you. What was the nature of slavery? When the Jews had no time of their own, when they were not allowed to keep anything, when they were not allowed to make any choices about time, liberty, work, enslavement, when they were enslaved. That's the reason that our story starts with we were slaves in Egypt for so many hundreds of years. We were liberated by God, who gave us this calendar of days of liberations. I said before that the 7-fold divisions of the calendar is called in ancient sources Mo'adei Dro. It means appointed time of liberty. Keeping those appointed time of liberty every 7 days, every 7 holidays, every 7 months, every 7 years and every 7/7 of years, that what had kept us as a nation from antiquity until today. That combination of cycles of free time, which are dedicated to scholarship and reading and teaching the whole entire community, that is the reason why we are still capable to read the sources of our forefathers and foremothers, and while other great nations are lost in oblivion. Think about it, and when next time somebody asks you what day is today, you'll ask according which calendar. Thank you very much.